Hi, I'm Nikolai, aka 56 Miner, and today we'll be unboxing our November Basics box. This month's box is all about urban sketching. We'll talk about some foundations of the art form, go over the materials in our box, and I'll share some tips and tricks that I picked up when working with them. Let's get into it. For our surface this month, we have a custom paint-on pad from Clairefontaine. This gray tone paper offers a unique take to urban sketching, which is like pen air painting or painting on location, but in a city setting. For our paints this month, we have a custom watercolor set from Kuretake Zig, which we're super excited about. We've curated this with classic watercolors in mind, but added a bit of shimmer so you can add some sparkle to whatever you create this month. And to make sure that you can paint on the go, we've included a water brush that's self-contained. The Brush 2.0 Petite from Kuretake Zig is a great tool for pen and painting. Remove the top to reveal a round brush and fill the reservoir with water, grab your palette, and you can paint nearly anywhere. Now, if you're not used to painting on a toned canvas, there are a few things to keep in mind that'll make your life a lot easier. Since we're working on a mid-tone, our color is going to come out a little bit more desaturated than we typically expect than from working on white paper. And because we're using a water brush, every stroke that we make is going to dilute that pigment a little bit more. If you want to create strong areas of color, for instance, it's important that you start with that area first and then fan out the pigment, because that water is going to dilute. Now, our watercolors will reactivate if we go over them with water, but not so much that we can't build our colors to get that more opaque, vibrant look. We curated this set so you should be able to create every hue within the color spectrum. So far we've been using a wet on dry technique. This is when you use a wet brush on dry paper. Let's flip that around and use a wet on wet technique. This will allow us to create more subtle gradients and have a softer transition with minimal brush strokes. Using our black, I'll start to dip in some of that pigment and push that around. That way you can get those soft transitions. The more water you use, the more likely the pigment will spread. I'll also use our teal, that way we have some good contrast between the dark and the light. For a fun texture effect, try sprinkling some salt onto the still wet canvas. The salt will pull that pigment together, and by letting it dry fully, you can see that we get a fun kind of marbling effect. This is a great way to incorporate texture when working with watercolors. Now, a big component of urban sketching is perspective, so let's take our Koh&Or Toyson Dior graphite pencil in B to talk about the fundamentals. Now, if you're new to perspective, it's a little bit overwhelming. It's kind of like math, but for the art world. The first thing that you'll want to establish is the horizon line. This is typically where the sky meets the ground in whatever viewpoint you're in. The next thing you'll want to establish is your vanishing point. The vanishing point is where all your converging lines will end up. It's kind of the farthest point in the distance. I'll create a couple guides that converge at that vanishing point to make sure that my buildings are in proper perspective. This will ensure that the buildings that are closest to us are bigger than the buildings that are in the background, because in the background they're going to shrink into the distance. The nice thing about one-point perspective is that you really only have to worry about your horizontal lines converging to that vanishing point. All of your vertical lines, so your lines going up and down, can become parallel and still reinforce that perspective. Doorways, windows, edges of buildings, these are all great examples of vertical lines that can be parallel. Not everything in your scene needs to adhere rigidly to that vantage point. Things like trees or more organic shapes are great ways to break that up to make your composition look a little bit less stiff. The next view that's pretty common in urban sketching is going to be two-point perspective. Now, just like you'd assume from the name, it's going to be same as one point, except we'll have two vantage points. What's really important about two-point perspective is that one of your vantage points exceeds off the page or outside of your composition. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of distortion. It's kind of like the fisheye lens in the sense that things will be warped and just look off. Just like in one-point perspective, all of our vertical lines can still be perpendicular to each other. So once we've got those horizontal line guides established, it's really easy to go in and add things like columns or windows because you already have those horizontal or the top and bottom lines established. In our example here, everything that's converging to the left vantage point is going to be what's coming towards us, and everything converging to our right vantage point is going to be what we're facing. Like I said in the beginning, perspective can be really tricky, so whether you're working in real life or from a photo reference, try to identify the vanishing points from your perspective, as it'll make things just a little bit easier and it'll make things look more realistic. Let's take what we've learned and create a piece using our paint on pad. Here I'm going to be working in 1-point perspective, and I encourage you to follow along. I'll start by establishing my horizon line and then add my vanishing point. With my vanishing point established, I can create some guides, that way my converging lines will all match up. It's key to remember that as things recede into the background, they get smaller. So as I add those details to the bridge, or any receding elements, I'm making sure that the scale goes down in proportion to how far into the background it is. Things like the castle that I'm building out that are the farthest in the background don't have to adhere to that 1-point perspective, which means that you can draw them a little bit flatter and without having to worry about them being in proper perspective. Now that I've got some guides established, we can go in with our water brush and have a bit more fun. This is really where the more painterly aspect of urban sketching comes in, as we've done all the hard work of creating the guides and the perspective. Remember when working with the water brush that you want to start with your darkest areas first and then fan out that watercolor. By working on different sections of our piece, we can allow them to dry and then go back in when that pigment is set to build color. This will really help elements pop off the page. Adding color to an urban sketch like this is pretty loose in nature just because you're kind of on the go, so don't get too caught up if it's not perfect. The loose watercolor style is kind of my favorite part about urban sketching. Using that metallic watercolor, we can add a fun shimmer effect to the water in this piece. You may have noticed that I worked from the background to the foreground when filling in color, and this is so I can layer without having to worry about getting too muddy. I'll also bring the pencil back so I can add some details to like the bricks or just the lines that the watercolor brush won't allow me to achieve. Let's grab the last item in our box, the Archer and Olive acrylograph pen in white. I really love these pens because they're going to be an opaque paint pen that will allow us to add a really nice crisp white to our urban sketch. We can activate the pen by pumping it on a hard surface. I always suggest doing this on something besides your piece because paint pens do have a tendency to be pretty juicy. I'll use it to add a light source to our fixtures and add a few details throughout the piece, like the shimmer on the water or some rim light on the back of our buildings. Because the paint in these pens are water soluble, I can use it in combination with our water brush in order to create a gradient in the background. I really love how the white just pops off that toned canvas. And with that, our piece is complete. Hope you enjoyed the video, learned a few things, and if you post your work online, make sure you use hashtag SketchBox November. We love seeing what y'all create each month. And if you want to check out any of our previous videos, head over to our YouTube channel, and I'll see you next month.